Okay, great. So we are going to be starting with a question about women proposed by Jamie McLeod-Skinner's team. Our candidate support committee narrowed the topic to access to health care. The question is, between 2011 and 2021, 267 rural hospitals dropped OBGYN services. This represents almost 25% of America's rural OBGYN units. How would you guarantee access to health care for rural women in CD5? And we're going to start with Janelle Bynum.
So as a mother of 4 children, access to women's health care has been particularly important to me as I've had my children, as I've raised them, and now as my daughters are going into womanhood. And one of the things that I've seen is that we don't have enough healthcare providers. So in the legislature, I led the charge to make sure that we had the Scio program, which is to increase the number of rural providers. And what it does is it addresses the student debt issue. It allows us to pay for the schooling of rural health providers while they're, at OHSU receiving their education, and then they can come back and work and make sure that they don't have student debt as they're providing health care. One of the things that I think is really important is not just health care for women as we're aging, but really it's 0 to 100 health care. So prenatal care, I've been on the board at the Ronald McDonald House, and BIND in particular serves mothers who are having children who are having issues early. And so it is this focus on the whole woman's health, and it is also the focus on children's health and adults' health from 0 to 100. So I've been in the trenches making sure that we grow the number of providers. I've also made sure that we provided legislation to make sure hospitals stay open. And we've been relentless about protecting healthcare workers as well. So we know we have that full spectrum of issues to deal with when it comes to women's health care.
Thank you. Jamie McLeod-Skinner.
Just confirming it's the 2 minutes versus, yeah. Well, as a mom of 4 who's actually lived in a rural area, this is especially important to me. We've seen the need for everything for telehealth. That's a huge piece, so making sure we have rural broadband, but providing a full range of physical and mental health care for all Americans includes a real focus on rural areas, because that's where we've fallen short. And I know a lot of folks who've talked about their personal experience of losing access to health care. One of those aspects in the full range of health care we need to provide is reproductive health care. And that's everything for access to abortion, that is reproductive health, and that's also IVF. One of the things that we're seeing is a real challenge nationally is the attack on women's rights and access to abortion. And so one of the things I'm very committed to in terms of protecting our fundamental rights includes making sure that we codify the right at the national level to abortion. Here in Oregon, we have access, and so folks tend to not raise it or flag it as much of an issue. But nationally, we know it is under attack. We know we cannot trust this Supreme Court, so making sure that we have access is going to be really key. And this is something I've actually worked on with Planned Parenthood when they were concerned about people coming in from Idaho because of bans and restrictions there. This is outside the district, but in Eastern Oregon and everywhere from Enterprise to Ontario, I've helped build partnerships across not just in the urban metro area that has these resources, but also in rural areas. In Central Oregon, we're seeing a tremendous stress and a tremendous push. So the part of the civilian GI Bill that I proposed is also going to help us both care for healthcare providers, but make sure they have access, get into the pipeline so that they can go through college debt-free and then work in areas like rural areas where healthcare providers are needed.
Thank you so much. Janelle Bynum, would you like to provide a rebuttal?
Sure. I think what's really important is for us to acknowledge that Oregon enjoys some of the most unrestricted access to to abortion access in the country. And it is our job as a legislator who actually helped codify a lot more options for abortion, access to abortion points. It's important for us to take that to Congress as well. And we know that Lori Chavez-DeRemer hasn't done that, hasn't stood up for military families, and we know that that is the job that needs to be done in Congress, just like it's the job that needed to be done here. So it's really important that we bring home that point. I'm the leader that stood up to help. I took my kids with me on the Reproductive Health Equity Act in Salem, and they watched, and I wanted to show them what it looked like to have civil debate and what it looked like for women to stand up and men to stand up for Oregonians that needed access to abortion.
Thank you.
And just another, even before Roe was overturned, there were Oregonians who were only dependent exclusively on the Indian health services, who did not have access to abortion health care and access to abortion because of the Hyde Amendment. So something that needs to be overturned. It's impacting our tribal communities who only have access to Indian health services. It's also impacting our service members because the Hyde Amendment, which at the federal level restricts use of federal funds for accessing abortion. So just as a reminder that even though some things have been provided here in Oregon, there are issues at the national level to make sure that all Americans can make decisions about our own bodies.
Thank you. Our second question is based on the policy area of public safety provided by Team Bynum. This question will begin with Jamie McLeod-Skinner. 64% of urban residents believe gun ownership decreases public safety by increasing access to firearms and incidents of gun violence. In rural areas, 65% of residents believe individual gun ownership increases public safety due to longer police response times and threats from wildlife. Can you talk about how gun ownership impacts public safety in urban and rural areas?
Sure, and since I'll focus a bit more on rural areas, since that's the topic here, to the point about how long it takes for public safety to get there, you know, where we live in rural central Oregon, it would take the sheriff about 45 minutes to get there if we call 911. So my dad hunted to put food on the table. You know, this is the reality of a lot of rural life, but there's also a strong commitment for responsible gun ownership amongst gun owners. And so providing those tools and those incentives and helping to make sure we're keeping families safe and also continuing some of the traditions we have here in Oregon for hunting and other recreation. Very clear, a weapon of war is not used to hunt, so there's distinction there. But we're also seeing in rural areas self-harm, guns used for self-harm, and that's actually the highest rate of death, human death is from self-inflicted. So there's a very high rate, second only to our soldiers is farmers. And so I saw this impact personally when I was a kid in Southern Oregon. I finished high school in rural Southern Oregon, and someone I knew that I played basketball with, she was depressed. She got access to her dad's handgun and took her own life. So some of the steps and some of those basic protections for responsible gun ownership, we can put those into place at the federal level. But there's also things like Violence Against Women Act and making sure that we have some other laws that help to protect women. Protecting women from rape, from violence, for domestic violence. There's a lot of steps we can take to establish additional laws. Some are here in Oregon, but red flag laws and others that happen at the national level is going to be really key to make sure we're protecting communities so that it's both recognizing responsible gun ownership, but at the same time, background checks and these other basic steps we can take to make sure we're protecting folks. In urban areas, there's a different dynamic, but again, wanting to focus based on the introduction on issues here in rural areas.
Thank you. Janelle Bynum?
So one thing I'm known for is showing up for my constituents. And I will say, just as I show up for my children at home, and they each have different needs, that's how I show up for my constituents. So whether they're rural or urban, there are some universal truths. So The first is when it comes to ghost guns. I think there's general consensus that there's not a real interest to having unregistered or untraceable guns in a community, especially from a domestic violence standpoint, a terrorism standpoint. That is, I think, something that many of us can agree on. I worked on that in the legislature and helped get that passed. I also led on closing the boyfriend loophole. Those are, from a domestic violence standpoint, we know that those are issues that affect people, mostly women, both in the rural areas as well as the urban areas. In the rural areas, what we also needed was additional state troopers. And while that doesn't necessarily sell well in Portland, adding more police, it certainly is a real reality in the rural areas when you may not have 24-hour service. And so I led, when I was on the Judiciary Committee, I led in that space to make sure that we added troopers so that when people did have issues, there was someone that they could call. I think ultimately the issue about guns and their place in our community is you need a leader who's going to show up for you, who is going to hear you, who is going to be able to unify the district with policies and procedures and federal leadership that makes it safer for all of us.
Thank you. Jamie, would you like a rebuttal?
Yeah, just one of the other things that's really key on this issue, and especially in talking about holding hearings and hearing issues, safety includes women's safety from rape to sexual assault. My colleague opponent was in the situation where she refused to actually hear a bill and bring it to the floor. She was the chair of the committee, refused to hear a bill that would have provided further protections from students who were sexually molested by their teachers. She then unprecedented, all of her colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, had to use a step that is rarely used to actually force her to bring that bill to the floor. Otherwise, it would have died in committee. And it was, speaking of rural, the East Oregonian actually called her out on that for using kids as a political pawn. They specifically did that because the child who the law was named after was actually from nearby, from Athena. The other thing also, again, on extending protection for rape victims, this is part of public safety, it's part of assault, and making sure that we not just have public safety, but also people have their day in court is key. She was the lone legislator, Republican or Democrat, to vote against extending protection for rape victims to 7 years. So what that means, it was reduced to a less amount. What that means is here in Oregon, you have a longer statute of limitations for trespass on your property than you do trespass on your body. And that was something that she stood alone. This is something that Republicans and Democrats agreed to. We need to protect people. We need to protect victims of rape. We need to protect victims of assault. And there's multiple situations now, whether she was chairing a committee and refused to bring something forward to actually have it go to hearing, or also just to stand up and say, we need to hold people accountable. Again, part of public safety is stopping people in times of violence, but also holding their feet to the fire and making sure that people have their day in court to make sure that their rights are protected.
Thank you. I think it's really important because my opponent focuses a lot on both of us being a minority, that we bring forth the issues in totality. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that I'm a black woman, I have children, I have a husband, I come from a community that has a mixed relationship with guns and violence. And it is important that we create space, especially in the legislature or in any legislative body, to hear the entire story, not just a story based on fear. And I think my opponent is really digging in on fear. She's digging in on fear of black people, fear of black leadership. She's digging in on rape. She's digging in on issues that she's never had to work on in the legislature. I am a courageous leader. I will stand up when things are not necessarily popular, but you can count on me, even if your position isn't the most popular position, you can count on me to stand up and say, my constituent in Marion County feels differently, and I'm not afraid to tell you they feel differently. Because there's this rural and urban, there are people who try to divide us based on race, they try to divide us based on location, they try to divide us based on socioeconomic status, but I won't let that happen. I am the person that stands up even when it is politically different, even when it is politically inconvenient. I will stand up and I will take the hard votes and I will force people to reckon with multiple truths. Not just one truth, not just the popular truth, but multiple truths. And that is how we get good legislation. I won't continue the status quo here in Oregon.
Thank you. The next question is regarding the policy area of attracting employers and job creation, and it was proposed by Team Janelle Bynum. This question will also start with Janelle Bynum. At the federal level, there is a historic level of funding for desperately needed infrastructure upgrades in rural communities. Receiving federal aid for necessary upgrades to infrastructure, rural broadband, and renewable energy could change rural communities with living wage jobs. In CD5, some more conservative local elected officials are hesitant to receive federal funding. How would you partner with city, county, and state elected officials to bring resources for job creation in Oregon?
When I did the Oregon CHIPS Act, which was built on the federal CHIPS Act, and that CHIPS Act was designed to help encourage science and investigation, grow our semiconductor manufacturing industry, protect our national security interests, and also grow good living wage jobs. When we looked at what the policy should be here in Oregon, one of the things that I made sure happened was that there was shared prosperity. Shared prosperity. That means that it wasn't just limited to what Portland or Hillsborough could get. It was also going to have to be shared around the state. And I understand that there are at least 3 companies here in this area that have benefited from that CHIPS, the almost $300 million that Oregon set aside for the CHIPS Act. What is really, really important to me is to make sure that around the state, our children have jobs that they can come back to. If they go away to college, if they go to community college for trade school, they don't have to incur a lot of debt, and they have something to look forward to when they graduate from high school. It is that pipeline of prosperity and hope. It is that pipeline of good family wage jobs, and it is also an investment in our community. I was able to lead a team of legislators, both Democrat and Republican, in this space, and we marched forward united to help grow the CHIPS Act and to help pass that in this state. That is unprecedented leadership that my colleague cannot match. That is $300 million of investment for Oregon that led to $43 billion of estimated growth in this state and 6,000 jobs. You can't match that. I did it here in Oregon, and I'll do it again in Congress.
Just to put a close on the last question about rape, I came out as a young adult. I've been out for years. Back then, if you were out and a lesbian, you could lose your job, you could lose your home, you could lose your life. And many a times, I was told, as many of my colleagues in the LGBT community were told, the cure for lesbianism is rape. So rape has been an issue for me and my family and my kids for my entire adult life. So it is something of great concern, and it's of great concern here. So jobs. The question was about building infrastructure throughout the state. And so we know we've got a desperate shortage of housing, affordable housing. Albany, we've got an Albany council member here. It's a huge issue throughout in urban and rural areas. And something that the legislature made a mistake on is they were looking at pushing out rather than building up. They're not respecting our farmland and careful use of our farmland. We need to make investments in infrastructure, in housing, in roads, in rural broadband, in the opportunities that will allow us to create the environment for families to thrive. So I've served, in the last 20 years, I've served 12 years in elected office in urban and rural areas, in rural Central Oregon, also in Silicon Valley, actually headquarters to the businesses that she's talking about. And so worked a lot with those businesses. They are urban focused. Those benefits will come to the Portland metro area. But the other thing is that they actually lost. She's not telling you about the manufacturing they lost. Now, she's blown that off. It's a manufacturing plant. She didn't think it was this big of a deal. But it's important because those are jobs. And yes, we need high-tech jobs. We also need living wage and working jobs. So the things that I'm focused on is, yes, we need the infrastructure for our communities, but also for our farms and ag. One of the things that distinguishes this race, I don't take corporate PAC money. I never have in my 20 years that I've been involved in politics. And that's key because of the corporate chicken farms. That's key because of the fact that we have private equity firms buying up farmland. That's a bigger issue in rural areas.
Thank you. Janelle, would you like to rebut the answer? Okay. Moving on to our fourth, and this will be our final question of this debate format. So the topic is the rural-urban divide, proposed by Team Jamie McLeod-Skinner. We had a late submission that we know is really important to a lot of people in this community, so we have graciously swapped this question out at the recommendation of the Linn County Democrats. The question is, and we're beginning with Jamie McLeod-Skinner. For the past several years, community members in the Scio area have been actively fighting a poultry corporation coming into their town and sitting millions of chickens next to their rivers, schools, and churches. Thankfully, their local advocacy efforts were successful, and the poultry operations appear not to be moving forward. If elected, what would you do to ensure that rural communities do not become sacrifice zones for corporate agribusiness?
Oh, this is huge. That's such a great question. And actually, last time I was in this room was at the meeting that they were discussing the pushback and how to deal with the corporate chicken farms, and I still brought my sign from them. This is a huge issue, and again, I mentioned before I don't take corporate PAC money. The corporatization of ag is a horrible issue and a horrible problem and challenge that we're facing. So two of the big things that I would be supporting at the federal level, one is establishing the Office of Small Farms, the Small Farm Establishment Act. That's really key because the Department of Ag is focused on larger farms, and we have here in Oregon, over 95% of our farms are small family farms. I actually lived on a small family farm in Southern Oregon, 18 acres, we grew hay, and then also had about 50 head of sheep. So this is something very real. It's also real in my service to you all currently on the OWEB board, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, where we work with folks with working lands to make sure we're protecting our natural resources and those ecosystems, but also helping local economies and working in partnerships with farmers and ranchers. And my wife's family comes from a ranching family from Eastern Oregon. So we need that legislation of make sure we're focused on small family farms, and also food security. It's another huge issue that we're addressing. It's a big project working on in Central Oregon with farmers there who are supporting me, and we're working on food security issue. I'll remind you that food security is both having food and having it be healthy food. And then also halting the ag mergers. That's something we need to put in place right now. We're seeing farmland being brought up. That's a huge issue we can do at the federal level. The other thing I'll point out in terms of a contrast in this race is my colleague opponent owns several McDonald's. McDonald's relies on corporate chicken farms and is now buying up and having partial ownership in those corporate chicken farms. So making sure that we're protecting our air and water like we do with OWEB and those investments that we make, that's also something we do through reauthorization of the Farm Bill. I've been pushing for that. I actually had an op-ed piece on that. Those are other steps we can take.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think this question is about quality of life. It's about who's going to show up for you. It's about who's going to show up even when they don't always understand the exact issue. And will they do it over and over and over again? I'm the only candidate who can say that I voted for the bill in the legislature to make sure that the citizens of this area were protected. I voted. I cast that vote. And one of the things that people admire most about our office's operations is that if they call their state representative, and even if they don't call the exact right state representative, my philosophy is that when you call government, is it going to show up for you? Is it going to hear your pain? Is it going to stand in between huge corporate interests that may not have your best interest in mind? That's what I've always done. And so in this case, what I think is really important is that we make sure that when people bring an issue to government, that we act on it. I would say that the toughest part on this particular issue is that it doesn't just stop with chicken farms. It could be a worm farm, it could be a motor factory, it could be anything. But is it something that, thank you, is it something that your legislator, your federal leader has experience on? Are you just an activist, or are you a person that brings solutions? Can you hear my pain, and can you bring solutions? Are you going to be on the line with me, and can you bring solutions? That's the kind of leader that I am. I took the vote. I was happy to take the vote for this community, and I'm happy to continue taking those votes, and I'm happy to continue showing up. If you call, I'll show up, and I'll lead.
So I appreciate that there was a temporary hold on that, but that's why we need the federal legislation I mentioned for longer term. And in terms of showing up, really appreciate that as well. I've toured each and every one of those sites. I've spoken to the neighbors, and so showing up is important, and understanding issues is important. The other thing that is an issue, and it's not just the corporate chicken farm. Well, I'll say more about, again, I don't take corporate PAC money. My colleague opponent has taken over $400,000 in corporate money, corporate PAC money in her time in the legislature. In the 20 years that I've served, in the 12 years in elected office, I've never taken corporate PAC money, because there is that accountability piece, accountability to voters, understanding issues, showing up, having those conversations. I've been to every corner of this district in urban and rural areas, and understand the issues throughout the district. But other ag issues, in Central Oregon, drought's a big one. And so I've worked very closely behind the scenes with Republicans and Democrats, essentially coming up with a solution that we then floated up to the legislature on water banks to handle the drought in Central Oregon. Water and drought's not as big an issue on this side of the hill, but it's a big issue in Central Oregon. So understanding those issues, and then also, again, land use. So if there's pressure for land use, and the legislature, as it has waived off and is not establishing the protections necessary for our family farms, that's where we're going to see the biggest impact, especially in areas like this. So the ability to invest in infrastructure so that we're able to build up in communities, stay within those urban growth boundaries, so that we can indeed make sure we both provide housing, provide the resources that families and communities need, but at the same time protect our small family farms. And Kendra couldn't be here tonight. A lot of you know her. She actually is the one who gave me the tour on those different sites. And so knowing the issues and actually talking to folks who are impacted by them, Republican and Democrat, is my MO. It's why I've been so successful in purple areas and working across the divide.
I'm not sure what success my opponent is talking about in terms of being successful in a purple area, but I've won 4 elections in a purple seat. I've won 4 elections with rural, urban, suburban, black, white, Vietnamese, Russian, Ukrainian. I've been able to serve the districts that have a wide disparity of interests and voices, but the one thing that unites them is that they want to make sure that their communities are safe and are cared for. They also want to make sure that they have something to pass down to their children. How do we do that in the legislature? And my opponent is talking about taking corporate money in the legislature. Let me just tell you, as a swing district person, and this is somewhat to an extent in this race, but you have to have the numbers. If you have the numbers in the legislature, you can control the committees, you can control the policy, you have the gavel, you set the agenda. If you don't have the numbers, whether it's in the legislature or in the federal government, You will not control the agenda. You're just throwing rocks. And that's why we're sitting here today, because Democrats didn't win. We don't have the numbers. We want to win the House back, and I'm the one that can do it.
Thank you. So that concludes part one of our candidate forum. Part two will be forum style. So we're going to be asking questions that were posed by party leaders and other groups, and each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the question. For part two, we'll start with Janelle Bynum because just to follow the order of the questions from before. Our next question will be about water and climate. As the effects of climate change become more extreme each year, with high temperatures leading to wildfires and low snowpacks, resulting in reduced snow melts, how can the federal government assist farmers and rural communities in Oregon to become more sustainable and resilient to climate change impacts?
Well, one thing I think is number one, to acknowledge climate change, and I think it's a matter of who you send there. Elections matter. The second thing is, I think, investing in innovation. How do we, I actually won awards in my restaurants for water conservation, reducing usage, reducing waste. And I was really proud of that because it all actually happened because we got extremely high water bills. It's very expensive in Portland, and people tend to think water just kind of comes. We know that in rural Oregon, it doesn't just kind of come. There isn't the abundance. Sometimes there is an issue with quality. But it is really important for us to conserve. And so what I have done is led on innovation, making sure that the federal government, what I would do in Congress is make sure that the federal government invested in those innovations and invested also in working with the tribes. When in the legislature, we talked with the tribes, they said, we've been doing water conservation and water management for thousands of years, and we don't know why anyone isn't listening to us in the way in which we need to be listened to. So I think it is a partnership between communities. It is a partnership also with our educational system and in the spirit of innovation. And also it is a partnership with the federal government to make these infrastructure investments. And we know that water, especially infrastructure investments, are extremely expensive and generally cannot be paid for by the populace. So I've done this in the state legislature, and I'll do this again in Washington.
Thank you.
Appreciated the shout out to the tribes, but those you here may not know that Warm Springs has not had clean drinking water for years now. So there's work to be done. So on the environment, there's both long-term and short-term solutions. For the long term, we need to invest in a renewable energy grid and have a just transition to renewable energy, so we're maintaining the cap, but also investing in storage, to be able to both capture renewable energy. This is a great economic boon opportunity for Oregonians. At the same time, we have to be careful how and when we do that, because solar farms can also impact ag land, and so making sure we're putting those investments in the right places is really key. I actually, when I served on city council, the city owned its own power utility, so I've got a lot of experience in working on this. And this is also, there's a sense of urgency given the prices, the power prices that are rising, electricity. Investing in R&D to help with some of the technology that will be needed as an engineer, as a civil engineer. This is near and dear to my heart, so make sure we get that technology in place. But then in terms of the short term, making sure we're preparing and responding to, in Central Oregon drought, there's a lot of piping projects that are going in to help conserve water. As I mentioned, the drought and water conservation is a huge issue. And then of course the impacts. I mean, everyone here, we think about wildfires. I led wildfire recovery in the city of Talent, which lost a third of its homes and businesses to wildfire just down the road, less than 10 miles from where I finished high school. And they asked me to come in, help them get back on their feet after the community was devastated. I've also been working as part of OREM, the Office of Resilience and Emergency Management, to help in that emergency preparedness for communities. and then also, and especially reaching out to vulnerable communities to make sure folks are prepared, better able to respond when crisis, when wildfire, drought, heat waves hit. At the federal level, something else we can do, because heat waves are a bigger issue, or actually an issue throughout our state, is we reauthorize the Stafford Act to make sure that FEMA can also fund the impacts from heat domes. That's something that's not in place now. Given my personal experience and professional expertise, that's something I'll bring to the table in Congress.
Thank you. To continue the discussion on wildfires, our next question is about the Beachy Creek fire and wildfire response. Some residents believe that their Beachy Creek wildfire was made worse by lack of response due to the remoteness of the fire, even as a strong easterly windstorm was forecast with potential to significantly worsen conditions. What will you do to partner with local agencies to increase disaster preparedness and improve wildfire response in CD5's rural communities at the federal level?
Well, this is work I'm doing right now and work I've been doing for a long time. And just, a show of respect to the 5 lives that were lost. This was also, there was a Beachy fire, there was also, it combined with the others. I mean, it was just literally, it was a living hell for those who had to go through it. So working with local community groups, again, this is work I've done as part of OREM currently, and they brought me on board on a part-time basis because they wanted my expertise from the work I'd done in talent, and working with a lot of different communities. In talent, it was a large impact on seniors on a fixed income and also farm workers. In this area, I mean, it's farmers and a lot of rural folks who are in very vulnerable areas. So making sure we work to help do the preparation. Again, this is work we're doing right now. Building resilient communities. There is federal legislation that I'm familiar with and would be working to make sure we get that funding in place, because unfortunately the state legislature hasn't fully funded and provided adequate funding for OREM to go forward and do this work that's needed right now to prepare for a future wildfire. But that is needed at the state level, but also a partnership at the federal level. I mentioned making sure FEMA can not just fund the impacts we're seeing on things like heat dome, but also those opportunities for improvement. I got to see on the ground firsthand the problems with a slow response, but there's also the recovery we're going through. So rebuilding homes, having temporary homes, establishing the infrastructure and preparing communities so that they've got the water and sewer, and building back better, essentially. Democrats have heard that one before, but building back better after wildfire, but also preparing safety factors around the home. I'm working on an affordable housing project now that is, part of it will be poured concrete, so more fire resiliency. This is an issue, yes, in the Santiam Canyon area, but really throughout the district. Folks are terrified when they see wildfires, so making sure we're preparing people. OWEB is also actually working on fire resilience.
I think the most important thing for me as a leader is to act with urgency. So when we know that we're in wildfire season and we know that there are fires popping up, this is not an issue, this is not an urban versus rural issue, because it's on all of our doorsteps. It is in our faces. Even I, who live at the suburban edge, had to evacuate. So I understand what it means to have to leave things that you may never see again. And for some families, I believe it was 3,000 homes that were lost, that's real. But it is the most important thing to act with urgency. The second thing I think is it is important for your leaders to be good communicators, to communicate amongst themselves, and to build systems to communicate with people so that you know what's happening on the ground, you know what people's needs are, you know if they need dog food, or if they need childcare, or if they need a place to rest. You have to have those communication vehicles in place when you're dealing with any sort of emergency management issue. The next thing that we found out, and this is just based on experience, and my opponent has not talked about this, is communicating in multiple languages to multiple groups of people. We seem to think that we only need to communicate in English, or we only need to communicate verbally, but we have to make sure that everyone in our community feels seen and heard, especially in these emergencies. We also need to make sure that our students understand what building resilient communities looks like. My kids now know if we have to go, because we did when there was a snowstorm, they knew how to get up and go. Finally, I'll say that the Oregon legislature has stepped up with $10 billion in funding for emergency management. We are taking steps to take this more seriously, and I think under my leadership and Representative Evans, we're doing that.
Thank you. Our third question for part 2 is about rural broadband. To attract major employers to rural communities, reliable rural broadband is necessary. How would you ensure full fiber optic broadband throughout CD5 to even opportunities for communities to attract industry?
So I was talking about infrastructure before. Well, first, I'm just so struck by the irony of communicating in multiple languages. Our voter pamphlet statements that are before you, I translated to 10 languages, and my colleague opponent translated to 3. I just think it's hugely ironic. And in talent, our town halls were in English and Spanish, less than 5,000. It was amazing. This has been an issue I've been working on for a while. Everything from working with partners and actually folks, this is down in Klamath Falls, where our kind Republican tracker is from, and also with folks, well, throughout the state. This is a huge issue in rural areas. It impacts telehealth. It impacts our economy. It impacts use of farm vehicles. If you've ever tried laser leveling, you must have access to the internet. So it's partnerships, and public-private partnerships have been a lot of these standards, but we need federal investments. And when you invest federal dollars, you can establish standards to make sure that it's not just having access to rural broadband, but you also have the bandwidth, essentially, that you need to do a lot of the work. And whether it's ag work, this is also important for our local economies to essentially diversify our portfolio of our local economies so that people can work in other sectors as well. And we're now seeing, especially during COVID, we had a lot of folks move to rural areas or looking to move to rural areas. That can be good for a local economy. And so making sure that folks have those access to rural broadband through the partnerships. We need federal investments. That's something that there have been some made, but we need to be more aggressive about that, because just as we've established the interstate highway system, we are now in the information age, and so we need to establish the broadband electron interstate highway system, and that's something that should be a federal investment, and that's something I'm committed to doing, especially for rural areas.
Thank you.
Thanks. I agree with my opponent on a lot of those issues, and one of the things when I was leading the work on putting in rural broadband and drawing down the federal funds, I think it was an attention to detail to making sure that, number one, communities that already had like a fiber optic system or already had an internet system within their boundaries, that they had an opportunity to continue to grow. I also wanted to make sure that we were investing in Main Street broadband, we were investing in telehealth, we were investing in our libraries, we're investing in our businesses. For instance, security systems rely on broadband. Even your pricing at your local small business, that requires broadband. So all of these little nuances, I think, are really important for your federal leaders to understand where things can go wrong. So we're excited about the money that is going to come to Oregon. We don't necessarily know how many households we need to serve, because again, going back to that language issue, we needed to make sure that we were reaching people that actually didn't have broadband before. And we also need to make sure, and you'll start to see this, that the bidding process is fair. That is a real issue. There's a real war between corporations and cities and smaller outfits. We want to make sure that everybody has a fair shot to bid on the infrastructure that's going to be installed, and that it's very high quality. And I think you'll need leaders to make sure that that is happening, and who will show up for rural Oregonians and make sure that it is the highest quality that they can get.
Thank you. Our final question of part 2 is about the PRO Act and the right to organize. President Biden recently became the first sitting U.S. president to join a picket line, standing with members of the United Auto Workers Union. In rural communities, unions can be perceived as liberal organizations, and union density can decrease due to fears of retaliation for membership status. As working conditions for healthcare workers, teachers, and more continue to deteriorate, do you support the rights of workers to collectively bargain free from interference? And would you vote in favor of President Biden's protecting the right to organize or PRO Act?
Can I answer this one? I want to answer this one. Can I go for who's next?
We're going to start with Janelle.
Okay.
Or,
Go ahead.
okay,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jamie. We're going to start with Jamie
Go ahead.
McLeod-Skinner.
I'm just so excited about this. Absolutely, I would not just vote for it, I would sponsor it, and I would push to move it forward. As a very proud former union member, as someone who's really proud of the support I've got from unions and working people, this is I'm really passionate about this issue. I'm passionate about working family issues. My grandfather was a shop steward and built tractors. He worked in a factory, and he got to buy a home. He got to have a solid middle class life because of unions, and so it's so critically important. It's important that the work we're doing, I mentioned the renewable energy grid, that those are good paying union jobs. I'm really proud of our president. We've got, this president has been the best in, going back, I think in my lifetime, on anyone who's been really great on union issues. So absolutely, a lot of people will pay lip service to this. Lori Chavez-DeRemer paid lip service to it, but then she stepped back from it. So she'll talk all day, but I would not just vote for it. It would be part of my agenda for my first term, my first 2 years, is to get it to go forward. I would co-sponsor it and really push to move forward on it. When I talk about, the big things I talk about is protecting, helping working families get by and protecting our environment and protecting our fundamental rights. When I talk about protecting our fundamental rights, I talk about the PRO Act. Our right to organize is included in our right to access to make decisions about our own body, to abortion, to voting rights, frankly, healthcare as well. But our right to organize is critically important. And former union member, I come from a union family. This is really key. Proud of the support I've got. And this is actually a big distinction in this race when you see you find people's track records and you see where folks are at. This is really important, and this is the time to do it. We need to re-win the White House and move forward in the PRO Act.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. I've stood with workers on the line, and actually the most memorable time was when I took my kids with me to the Nabisco line, and it was up in North Portland, and it was really interesting how the company pushed this orange kind of construction fencing to about 4 feet within it's a highway, but it's like a 4-lane highway with big trucks going along it. And I remember being there, it was about 12 o'clock at night, and just listening and talking with the workers who were being forced into overtime, who couldn't care for their children fairly. The older workers were taking the slots for the younger workers who had children to care for and other home responsibilities. And that to me was really, I didn't understand how Nabisco was leading on that. And so I led the charge to send a letter from the legislature to ask them to negotiate fairly with the employees. And I took my kids because I really wanted them to understand what it means to stand up for your rights, what it means to stand up and to sacrifice not just for yourself, but for future generations. And that is what the PRO Act is about. It's about getting wins for this generation, the next generation, and generations to come. I am proud that my daughter, she just finished her time with UFCW. She had challenges when she was working at the grocery store, but I encouraged her to work through her union, and she was able to get the pay raise that she deserved. Now she's ready to go back, but she's in Georgia, and she's like, I don't know if I have the same union protections that I had in Oregon, and I'm really nervous about going to work. So for those reasons and more, I'm a strong proponent for working families and for the PRO Act. And I would encourage you to look me up. I'm Janelle Bynum, janellebynum.com, and I would love to have your vote in May.
Thank you. And just to conclude, so I unintentionally just skipped right over the candidate introductions and went straight into questions. So to compensate for that, what we're going to do is give each candidate up to 3 minutes to talk about their platform and why you should vote for them. We can begin with Janelle.
Well, good evening, everyone. I am State Representative Janelle Bynum. I am mom to Christine, Ellis, Caroline, and Asa. 2 of them are college age. One is graduating on the 19th, just before the election. And I'm really proud that what our family values is education. I first ran to pass opportunity on, and as I just mentioned, I'm really interested in making sure that we're not just supporting this generation, but we're supporting generation after generation after generation of Oregonians. I am the only candidate that has served for 4 terms in elected position in a swing district. I understand what it means to have to knock a lot of doors and hear different people's perspectives. I understand what it means to also have to reach across the aisle, just like I did when I helped pass 23 public safety and police accountability bills. I worked with my Republican colleagues, not just to get, because we could have passed anything during that time, but that didn't mean that it was good legislation for the state. And my interest was in making sure that we always had the voices of Oregonians that maybe I didn't necessarily have access to all of the time. So leading on public safety is a big win for me. Leading on reproductive health. Oregonians have said time and time again that they want us to protect Roe even though it's gone. I did that in Oregon with the Reproductive Health Equity Act. I'll do that again in Congress. I've also led on CHIPS, as I mentioned. Economic justice is social justice. There is nothing better than being able to feed yourself and your family and not have to ask anyone for anything extra. There is nothing better than having your own insurance policy and you can go to the doctor and get a $10 copay whenever you want it. There is nothing better than economic freedom. Economic freedom means you have freedom to educate your kids. It means you have freedom over your body. It means you have freedom over your land. That, to me, is the rural spirit. It is the Oregonian spirit. And it is the spirit that I will take not just from Oregon, but I will take that to Washington. In closing, I think it's really important, as I mentioned before, it's really important to elect someone in May who can win this election. We know Lori Chavez-DeRemer isn't protecting reproductive rights. We know she's kind of wishy-washy on even constituent services and making sure that she shows up for people. I am the person that has won. I am the person that runs a disciplined campaign. I am the person that understands working family issues. I'm a mother of 4. I care about the next generation. And I hope you'll vote for me at JanelleBynum.com on May 21st. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. We will hear now from Jamie McLeod-Skinner.
All right, thank you. Jamie McLeod-Skinner, I was very proud to be your nominee 2 years ago after the legislature redrew the 5th Congressional District, cut it in half, and extended it into some very red and purple areas. So now it is a toss-up district. It's critical that we win this district to flip the House, to bring leadership to Congress. But it's important to both win the House, flip the House, and also bring the kind of values that Democrats care about and that also that Oregonians care about. In this newly drawn district, only a third of the voters are Democrats. And so we must have someone who can win outside of the Portland metro area. It's only Democrats are elected outside the Portland metro area. Outside of that, we know there are few Democrats outside of specific blue areas. So having someone who has the relationships, has the experience, on the ground experience in areas where we need to win is critically important. I've actually, if you look at even a head-to-head against Lori, back in 2016, well, both Janelle and I have beaten her in Portland, but in 2016, she actually lost her in Clackamas County. I beat her in Clackamas County. I beat her in Deschutes County. Those are critical. That's 2/3 of the county, critical to winning in November. Having outperformed the governor by 7 points in the district, all those things are critical. But my background, I lived on a small farm I finished high school in Southern Oregon. Actually, when I drove through Staten, was envious because your Safeway and your Wilco is right next to each other. We have to make 2 separate stops in Central Oregon. But I'm an engineer, an attorney, and a small business owner. Went to product of Oregon Public Schools from high school and also law school, focused actually on water law and Indian law. I've had a lifetime of public service. I began my public service over in Bosnia and Kosovo just after the war. Back then, because I came out as a young adult, I couldn't serve in the military, so I worked for a humanitarian organization. But I also, living in a small town, I had to go out of the state to get a job and to be able to come back. And that's one of the things I want to change for our rural areas. In the past 20 years, I was first elected to a city council 20 years ago. In a very urban area. I've also been elected in rural Central Oregon. And so the issues of broadband, when I served on the Education Service District Board in Central Oregon, and during COVID, we had to work to make sure our students could learn. And so rural broadband, those issues are really key. My priorities, my focus are kitchen table issues, the issues that everyday Oregonians are facing, from students and teachers and educators and farmers and ranchers. So housing, healthcare, childcare, all those core basics, protecting our democracy and also protecting our environment. And that also includes protecting our farmland. I have my career is based on public service, and it's been in the tough areas. We've spent a lot of time building up goodwill and reaching across the aisle and building up the kind of network that Democrats need to win in those tough areas around the district. Folks in Marion County and Linn know that as well. Thank you for hosting. JamieForOregon.com. Would be honored to have your vote.
Okay. Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you, Janelle. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for being willing to stand up for Oregon. And we've got great candidates. Now we get to decide which one we want to vote for, and then we fight really hard to get one of them into Congress in November. All right? Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. And vote. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, can we give our hosts a hand, the folks who organized and set up? Give everyone a hand.